Hey, this is Stephan from the Great World History book. In the last lecture we discussed the rise and fall of the Roman Republic. In this lecture we're going to take a deep look at the fall of the Roman Empire. The fall of Rome brought Europe back to prehistoric living conditions. It was that bad. But at its peak, very few Romans would have truly believed that Rome could fall. Here we have, for instance, a quote by Saint Jerome, who lived at the time of the fall of Rome. He wrote, "The whole world has died with one city. Who would have believed that Rome would fall, so that it would both be the mother and tomb of all people?" In the previous video, we've seen the rise and fall of the Roman Republic. At the end of the video, we saw that the Republic ended when Augustus, Emperor Augustus, became the first emperor of Rome. Augustus ended the Republic, but he did manage to stabilize Rome after decades and decades of tension and civil war. Amazingly, he managed to rule the empire for 40 years, until he finally died of old age. Here we see a statue of Augustus. But Augustus's rule had one major flaw that would keep plaguing Rome and would eventually contribute to its downfall. Instead of selecting the most capable man as his successor, he appointed a biological heir. Augustus had a couple of capable family members in mind, so that was a good thing. But they all happened to die prematurely. Eventually, the only remaining option was the son of his wife Livia from a previous marriage. The son was called Tiberius. Tiberius was a grumpy and uncharismatic man, yet he turned out to be a relatively efficient ruler. And because of his miserliness, the treasury had a huge surplus during his reign. Here we see a bust of Tiberius. Problems started to occur when Tiberius was succeeded by Caligula, son of Tiberius's favorite general Germanicus, who Tiberius had adopted as his son. Due to his father's popularity, father Germanicus, Caligula was at first greeted with enormous enthusiasm, and over the first few months he did much to please both the people and the Senate. But after getting some kind of brain fever, he got crazy. He became an insane tyrant, killing many of his family members and members of the political class, sometimes for mere amusement. He also plunged the empire into debt by organizing huge spectacles for the people and indulging in his own extravagant lifestyle. Various sources also accused Caligula of sexual perversion, including incest with his sisters, turning his palace into a brothel. He also demanded to be worshipped as a god, and on top of all of this, Caligula is said to have appointed his horse to the post of consul of the Roman Empire. Here we see a bust of Caligula. Eventually, the Praetorian Guard, the personal bodyguards of the emperor, could not tolerate his behavior any longer, and they stabbed him to death. Then they elected Claudius, the uncle of Caligula and brother of the famous general Germanicus. This appointment was exceptional since Claudius suffered from many disabilities, including a speech impediment. He did, however, have a sharp mind. He even wrote a few history books, which are unfortunately lost. And he is said to have used his disabilities even to appear like a fool to avoid Caligula's murder sprees. Claudius proved to be an able and quite efficient administrator. He restored the empire's finances and constructed new roads, aqueducts and canals across the empire. Here we have a bust of Claudius. After reigning for almost 14 years, Claudius was poisoned, and the position of emperor went to Nero, who was only 16 years old at the time. He killed politicians and also murdered almost his entire family. Nero also began a trend to debase the coinage by adding cheaper metals to them. This, of course, led to massive inflation. While the silver content of coins was originally about 94%, 2 centuries later this was reduced to only 0.02%, so a fraction of a percent, collapsing the economy. When a fire had burned down much of Rome, which happened on various occasions, Nero also famously used an area cleared out by the fire to erect a lavish new pleasure palace for himself. He then blamed the devastation of the fire on the Christian community, initiating the empire's first persecution of Christians. In the end, the Senate and the army could no longer stand by. Nero committed suicide to avoid capture. Here we have a bust of Nero. Having killed off almost all of his family members, there was no obvious heir left. And this of course led to a very dangerous situation. Empires and kingdoms are always most vulnerable at these transition moments. As a result, because there was no obvious heir, a civil war broke out over the throne. And within the short span of 18 months, Rome counted 4 emperors until the last one, Vespasian, brought back stability. Power then passed from Vespasian to his son Titus, and then to his grandson Domitian, who was another mad emperor. After Domitian was assassinated, the Senate nominated Nerva, an old and boring candidate, but a safe choice. Nerva then elected a very capable man named Trajan. Trajan became part of a succession of 5 emperors who initiated an era of unprecedented peace, prosperity and security for Rome, the golden days of Rome. But the last of the 5 emperors was the philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Despite his brilliance both as ruler and as philosopher, he did make a crucial mistake. While the other good emperors had chosen their heirs based on merit and then adopting them as their son to make them legitimate heirs, Marcus reverted back to the old tradition of choosing his biological son, Commodus. Although Marcus Aurelius had spent much time training Commodus for his role, Commodus also turned mad. He too murdered senators and was finally assassinated. Then things got even more out of control. The Praetorian Guard offered up the throne to the highest bidder. The empire went to Didius Julianus, who was murdered after just 66 days in office. After his assassination, 3 generals proclaimed to be emperor at the same time, leading to another civil war. The winner was Severus, the first of the so-called soldier emperors, who seized power through their command of the army. Eventually, Elagabalus became emperor at the age of just 14. He too was completely insane. It is said that he released poisonous snakes in the audience at the Circus Maximus, and he let himself get carried around in a chariot pulled by sometimes lions, sometimes naked women. He also debased the coinage much more, leading to much greater inflation, so that the people started to lose trust in the currency. He was finally killed, after which his body was dragged through the sewer. Rome grew even more unstable, if that's even possible, in the 3rd century AD. German tribes on the border started to pose a larger threat than they did before. Many civil wars broke out and whole chunks of the empire broke off. The economy was also further damaged by the debasement of currency. The year 238 even counted as many as 7 different emperors, and the 50 years that followed counted at least 26 official emperors. Madness. But then, around 270, a series of military emperors managed, it's a miracle, to stabilize the empire and granted another 100 more years of life. However, they were not able to fix the persisting economic problems. So after these 100 years, the decline would set in further. Now we have to talk a little bit more about the barbarians. The attack of the barbarians became increasingly intense. In the 4th century, the Huns, a tribe from the Central Asian steppes, moved into Europe and pushed the Goths, another tribe, into Roman territory. The Goths had asked the Romans permission to take refuge within Roman territory. Emperor Valens agreed and also offered them food, but in exchange for military service. But when the Romans failed to deliver, the Goths turned on Rome, resulting in the Battle of Adrianople, at which Emperor Valens was killed. Here we see a famous statue of a barbarian made by Romans. Notice the traditional moustache that the barbarians had, the spiky hair and the Celtic necklace. Sometimes the Romans were even too tolerant for their own good. They were known as a tolerant people, absorbing different cultures and traditions. The barbarian Alaric, for example, was allowed to serve in the Roman army, but then turned against Rome, looting a number of its cities. Later, he was again put in charge of the Roman army, don't ask me why. And after that, he captured and looted Rome itself for 3 days. Finally, the Franks took over France, the Visigoths took over Spain, and the barbarian Augustus deposed the last emperor of Rome, after which he declared himself king of Italy. So now Rome was completely fallen. So, in summary, what caused the fall? Well, obviously the election process of emperors produced much instability. It gave Rome mad and incompetent leaders, and it caused endless civil wars for the throne. Economic malpractice was another factor that we've seen. The barbarians had always been a problem for Rome, but the increasingly large border of Rome and the frequent civil wars made Rome extra vulnerable to their attacks. With all these problems, plagues, natural disasters and crop failures, which happen all the time, had a much stronger impact. With all this going on, Rome became stuck in a death spiral. When Rome could no longer defend part of the empire, it left many parts without defense. Having relied on a professional army for so many centuries, many cities didn't even have a city wall, and they didn't have any trained soldiers. As a result, they were easy prey for the barbarian tribes. Rome had also guaranteed safe roads, allowing merchants to trade over long distances. But without this safety, trade decreased, disrupting the economy. This was especially terrible since Roman workers were often very specialized. Often workers in various parts of the empire were specialized in just one part of the production. But when trade failed, the products could no longer be made. Their skills were suddenly worthless, and this helped to drop Europe back to prehistoric standards of living. So how deep was this fall? Although the barbarians adopted various Roman traditions and did stabilize their countries, the drop in quality of life was very, very, very steep. Cities shrunk dramatically in size. Rome once housed 1 million people, but was reduced to only about 17,000 people. It would last until the 19th century for another city to reach 1 million people. This was London. Paved streets, aqueducts, public baths, floor heatings all disappeared. Even tiled roofs, which had been common even for animal sheds in the Roman Empire, disappeared. Even stone buildings disappeared in most places of the empire, and Britain even lost the pottery wheel for 300 years. Art also declines, resorting into simplistic and stereotypical figures. Philosophy, mathematics and science vanished almost completely. Literacy rates also dropped. Literacy was common enough in Rome to be used for advertisement and just casual graffiti on walls. It's estimated to be about 10, perhaps 15%. But now it was almost zero. So this was the story of the rise and fall of Rome. I hope you enjoyed these lectures and learned a lot. See you next time.